And now we're on Daf Hey. Minayin sha'af b'shtar. How do we know from whence do we arrive the conclusion, as the Mishnah establishes the beginning of YomiMasechet, that a woman is nikdes b'shtar v'dinu? Maybe it'll derive from a kal v'chomer. Uma kesef she'ein motzi machnis. If a man wants to divorce his wife and give her kesef, it's meaningless. But yet, shtar, in the case of a get, shemotzi, even if you give the shtar, the get, to be motzi, to break up the issues, although kesef would not operate. And yet kesef is effective to create issues. Zeno dinshu shemachnis. How much more so would shtar be a machnis? If shtar is operative in gerushin, where kesef is not, then if you find where a place where kesef is operative, then how much more so shtar should be effective? And the Gemara rejects this kal v'chomer with a pirchama lekesef. There's a tzad chumra in kesef. What's the power of kesef? Shkein podebo hegdesh u'maser sheni. If you have hegdesh u'maser sheni and you want to be poded, you could be poded through kesef, transferring the kedusha, as it were, from the object that's hegdesh or the perils of maser sheni over to the mos. Ishtar tomar b'shtar she'ein podebo hegdesh u'maser sheni t'chsiv nasato hakesef v'komlo. So at the end of Sefer Vayikra it says that it's dafka through kesef that you can be poda hegdesh. You can't be poda hegdesh with a shtar, and therefore we see that kesef is more chomer than shtar. So it's possible that to be mekadesh and isha, you can only do so through kesef that has the power of pidyon hegdesh and maser sheni, but you cannot be mekadesh and isha with shtar, and therefore the kal v'chomer falls off. Therefore, we need a pasuk to teach me Kiddushin shtar. What's the source for Kiddushin shtar? In the parsha of Gerushin, it says v'yotza mibeis v'holcha v'hoisa leish acher. And we have now a hekesh between v'yotza, which is Gerushin, and v'hoisa, which is Kiddushin. Makish havaya liyitzia, ma yitzia b'shtar, af havaya nami b'shtar. And now the Gemara wants to know what is the scope of this Gzeira Shava of Havaya Liyitzia. How far can we go with it? V'yakish nami liyitzia Havaya mai Havaya b'kesef af yitzia b'kesef. This is a wild idea that maybe a man could divorce his wife by paying her money. I'm paying you to get rid of you. Please pack your bags. And here's a check. And that's going to be derived from Havaya. Because just like Kiddushin can be established through kesef, so to gerushin afkoski issues through the method of makish havaya litzia would also kesef be operative for gerushin. I'm wondering out loud. In the case of get, you need what's called lishma, because of law lishma. I mean, what would be kesef? You'd have to mint the coin for the purpose of gerushin, and for this isha and this isha and this isha. Wild. Amar Abaye, is it possible to say that you could divorce your wife by giving her kesef? Yomru kesef machnis, kesef motzi, and saneger yosas kategar. Now, for some reason, at this point in the Gemara is only bothered by ein kateger nasa saneger with regard to kesef and not with regard to shtar. I mean, shtar is going to be a saneger and it's going to effectuate issues. It's also going to be a kateger to undermine issues. Okay, we'll get to that later. But as far as kesef is concerned, the Gemara says it's impossible that kesef could create issues as a saneger and then serve a function as a kateger and undermine issues and terminate issues. So be consistent with regard to shtar. And the Gemara explains why is it that with regard to shtar you could be makadesh an isha with shtar and you could be magarish an isha with shtar. And the answer is that each shtar is a separate chefza. It's a separate halachic entity. Mili da high shtar lechud, umili da high shtar lechud. A star that's written for Kiddushin, that's one entity. And the essence of the star is to create issues. And then you have another star, the essence of which is to break up issues, and that's what we call a get. And therefore, the fact that a star could serve two functions, and therefore, l'chora, it should be a violation of kategan asanega, that's not true, because it's two different staros. One is a star Kiddushin, and the other is a star Gerushin. When you give kesef for Kiddushin, that's kesef for the sake of Kiddushin, and there's a new entity in this Havamina of kesef to break up issues as Gerushin. It says tiva mia chada. When they mint the coin whether it's for Kiddushin or for Gerushin. There's no separate entity. But in the case of a Gerushin, that's a separate entity because the get was written lishma. It was written as a created for the purpose of Gerushin, and it's not similar to a shtar Kiddushin. Now the Gemara offers another answer to justify the rejection of the Havamina that you could be Megarish and Isha B'Kesav Rav Amar Kra because of loss Sefer Krisus B'Ksiva Miskareshes Vena Miskareshes B'Kesav. Through a star that's written, it could serve as a Sefer Krisus, but Kesef could never be described as a Kesef, as a Sefer Krisus. V'yema Frekta Gemara B'Ksiva Miskareshes Vena Miskadeshes B'Ksiva. Maybe it means that a star could work as a Megarish, but it cannot serve as a Mekadesh. And if that be the case, then we may be able to say that she's Miskareshes B'Kesef. And because of law is only excluding Shtar Kiddushin. Gemara says, no, you can't possibly exclude Shtar Kiddushin, Haksiv V'Yotzav V'Hoisa, Makish Havai Litzia, and just like a Shtar, because of let's say for Krisus is effective for V'Yotza, so too a Shtar as a Shtar Kiddushin is effective for V'Hoisa as Havaya to create issues. You're not giving me a logical way of methodology over here, because you're telling me that because of law is coming to exclude Kesef from Gerushin. And you're oblivious to the Havaya Liyitzia, where Havaya through Kesef is operative. Let it be operative for Gerushin for V'Yotza as well. So why not say just the opposite? Why not use the Hekesh of V'Yotza V'Hoisa to teach me that a woman is Miskareshes B'Kesef, and the Pasuk because of law is going to teach me that Eina Miskadeshes B'Shtar. And the Gemara says, "Mistabra koi begerishin might begerishin koi begerishin might be koi begerishin might be kiddushin." It's logical to say that the pasuk because of law, which is in the parsha of Gerushin, is coming to exclude some din in Gerushin, and that means it's coming to exclude kesef as a method of Gerushin. But koi begerishin might kiddushin. Is it logical to say that the pasuk is in the context of Gerushin, it's coming to exclude a certain din in Kiddushin? For sure not. So since the pasuk because of law is in the context of Gerushin, it's logical to assume it's coming to exclude Kesef Gerushin, but it's not coming to exclude Shtar Kiddushin, like Rava said. Now the Gemara asks another kasha. Rav Yossi the apically like Krola Josh Achrini. Rav Yossi Haglili is going to derive from the cause of law a totally different din about what constitutes a document, a get for Gerushin. And it says the cause of law to exclude Balei Chaim or Ochel. Okay, that's a Gemara in Gittin Daf Chof Aleph Omid Beis. Is therefore yes to the question according to Rav Yossi Haglili Sheina Miskaresh B'Kesef Minoloi. Since he needs the possible because of law to exclude Balchai or Ochel, he doesn't have the freedom to use that pasuk to exclude Gerushi Kesef. On my cross, Sefer Krisus, Sefer Kosev Ein Tov Racha Korsa. So you see from this Gemara over and over again that the possibility of divorcing a woman with kesef is a serious possibility, and you need a drasha Gemara to exclude that. In fact, the Gemara for Rabbanan, they disagree with Rabbi Yosef Glili about the drasha. They use because of law to exclude gerusha kesef is high krisus my avdile. What do they do with the pasuk say for krisus? And mi boile dover. So here we get to Shir. You remember the sugya in Gittin of Shir, where he divorces his wife, but still leaves her attached to him. And therefore the Torah says, say for krisus, dover kores beino. You have to have an absolute split between him and her through the krisus, through the gerushin. And Kiddushin, but in the case of a rezeg yitech almanashalo tishte yayid, for the rest of your life you won't be able to drink wine. Or almanashalo telchu beis avich, you will never be able to visit your father's house, liolam, forever and ever and ever, without any limitation in time. Ein zeh krisa, she's still attached to him, and he still is holding on to some ishus. And that's not a sefer krisus, because sefer krisus means a total cuddle. Kol shloshim yom, however, if he says for 30 days you won't drink wine, or you won't visit your father, raise that krisus. And then if she's makayim the tanai, the get will be chal. Frek to Gemara, Rabbi Yosef Glili mikores krisus konafkale. In other words, how does Rabbi Yosef Glili know that the word krisus is going to teach me a complete krisus? He used the word krisus to exclude kesef. And Rabbi Yosef Glili ki kores krisus konafka. It could have said kores, so we'll say for kores, and it said krisus. So the extra word krisus, and that's going to teach me not only A, that kesef is not valid for gerushin, and B, that it's got to be a total, absolute separation. For Rabbanan, kores krisus lo mashma. Gemara says, we have three methods of Kiddushin. We cannot derive any single one of those three from any single one of the others, but if we had two, we could derive the third. Hey, Teisei. Which of the three could you derive from Etzad Hashav of the other two? Lo lichtav rachmana v'shtar. If the Torah had left out shtar, v'teisei b'hanach will derive from bia and kesef. That doesn't make any sense. When she receives kesef or bia, she gets hanah from it, and that's valid for creating Kiddushin and giving her the dasmak. But in the case of shtar, she doesn't get any benefit. Let's try a different option, a different combination. Lo nifta rachmana b'bia v'teisi mihana. Let's derive from kesef and shtar. If you're going to tell me, well, shtar doesn't have hanah, but kesef does have hanah. So l'chora you could derive bia from kesef and shtar. We have many situations in which kesef and shtar are operative and valid for kinyanim. For example, you want to purchase karka or an eved, but bia, that doesn't work at all for mama. So therefore, bia would be a lesser kinyan on the totem pole, on the hierarchy, from comparison to kesef and shtar that's operative in dinei mominos. Lo nichta rachmana v'kesef v'teisi bihana. Let's derive kesef from shtar ubia. You could be mekadosh an isha with shtar ubia, then you could derive from that you could be mekadosh an isha with kesef. Where it says, no, I have a pirch on that as well. Ma'alahanach shekei yeshna bal karcha. In the case of Yavama, she's niknes b'bia. In the case of Gerushin, he gives her a get bal karcha. But kesef, we don't find that kesef is meaningful and operative with regard to bal karcha. And you'll tell me, wait a minute, I have a precedent. I have a case where kesef is bal karcha. Is kesef nami bal karcha b'yom avriya? If the father sells his daughter and receives kesef as an amavriya, then it's shalom idaita. Gemara says that's in a different world. Is be'ishus mi'alo ashkecha. Amos is not an ishus, and we don't find with regard to ishus that kesef could be konev al karcha. And therefore there's no tzad hashava between kesef and shtar ubi. Amar Rav Huna chuppah kona mikal v'chomer. Rav Huna adds a fourth method of Kiddushin in addition to Kesef Shtar via Chuppah, effectuates Erusin. What's his Kal V'chomer? Ma Kesef Sheino Machal B'Truma. If a Kohen is Mekadosh and Isha B'Kesef, she cannot eat Truma until after the Suin. Then she becomes Kinyan Kaspo, and the Kesef does not effectuate a Kinyan Kaspo. But Kohen B'Chuppah Shemacheles B'Truma. I'm sorry, I put the comma after the word Kohen. So that again, Kesef can effectuate Erusin and doesn't give her rights as an Ashes Kohen to eat Truma. Chuppah, which means Nisuin, is Macheles B'Truma. Through Nisuin, this Bas Yisrael becomes an Ashes Kohen, Kinyan Kaspo, and she can eat Truma as Eno Din Shetikneh. This Kal V'chomer of Rav Huna is a Pella. But the truth is that every Kal V'chomer is a Pella. But this one is particularly difficult because the Machal B'Truma power of Chuppah is built on Kesef. In other words, Rav Huna is skipping the stage of Kiddushin and jumping all the way to Nisuin. And I guess what Rav Huna is saying is that Nisuin is a more powerful and profound Kinyan than Erusin, which is a Pella. And the Nafkamina is that whereas Erusin does not generate Kinyan Kaspo as far as Achil's Truma, Nisuin does. And therefore any method of Kinyan that operates for the lower level of Ishus, that means a Kinyan Erusin, should certainly operate for a Kinyan Nisuin. And therefore, let me say it the other way around. Any method that operates for Nisuin for sure would be operative and valid for Erusin. And therefore, Chuppah, which is meaningful to create Nisuin, should certainly be meaningful and valid to create Erusin. And the Gemara says, I don't understand this Kal V'chomer. V'kesef eino machil? That's not true. With Erusin, a woman, she's a Bas Yisrael married to a Kohen, is already considered Kinyan Kaspo on a Doraisa level. The entire din that we wait till Nisuin is the Rabbanan for one of two reasons. The Amar Ula Dvar Torah Rusa Bas Yisrael Chels B'Truma Shenemar V'Kohen Kikne Nefesh Kinyan Kaspo. V'Hai Kinyan Kaspo. Kinyan Kaspo means that if there was a Kinyan that was effectuated by Kesef, she eats Truma, and therefore through Kiddushay Kesef she eats Truma. Umatam Omru Eino Cheles. And here we have a machlokas, two explanations as to why the Rabbanan prohibited with Erusin the Achilas Truma. Also, we're afraid that if she's still living in her father's house, she may feed the members of her family Truma, and they're Zarin. But Midaraisa Kesef Kiddushin is enough to be Machil. So the entire Kal V'chomer of Rav Huna falls to the wayside. This is all Ula. We have another Shita, if I remember correctly, it's Rabbi Yochanan, I don't know, he doesn't quote it here, that it's Shema Yimtza B'Mum. Ela Prichachi, I have a different Kal V'chomer. Uma Kesef Sheino Gomer. Kesef does not complete the Kinyan Ishus. As long as she's not in a Suah, the Kinyan Ishus is only partial. And for example, if she is a Nara, then her father will continue even after Erusin to eat her Maisi Yadayim. He collects her wages. And not only that, if she dies, her father will inherit her. So the Kinyan Ishus is incomplete. And yet, nevertheless, Koneh, Kesef is Koneh. So Kesef is Koneh, an incomplete Ishus. Is Chuppah, here at Daf Heyamid Beis, Gomeres Eino Din Shetikneh. How much more so should Chuppah be able to create that first level of Ishus, a Kinyan Ishus? Because Chuppah has the power to create a Gemara Ishus, such that now Maisi Adel Liatzma, and Mesa Baila Yarsha. And she's completely removed from the rishus of her father. Okay, then this is where we'll stop on the top of Daf Hey Amid Beis.